Welcome to CG Movie Recaps. We are going to recap the movie of 2004, If Only.
Ian Wyndham is a British businessman who lives with his musician girlfriend Samantha Andrews in London. Ian takes Sam for granted, making Sam feel vulnerable in the role of the one who loves more. Taking us through a day in Ian and Sam's life, the film opens by showing different events such as Sam getting burnt on a kettle while cooking breakfast for the two. As they walk outside, Sam is seen holding an umbrella to cover Ian, while he quickly walks to catch his work. On the way, they discuss altering destinies, and Sam believes that the only thing that controls our destiny is the choices that we make. Ian then reminds her that their dinner date is tonight at 7 p.m., which causes Sam to question if he was kidding. Sam said that she's been preparing for her concert for 3 years, and it was tonight at 7 p.m. Unable to say anything but to apologize to Sam, Ian said he had to leave before he was late. As he quickly left, a passerby spilled Coca-Cola on Sam's shirt. On the way to work, Ian accidentally smashes his watch and it breaks. As Ian arrives at work, he asks his secretary to reschedule his dinner date to 9 p.m. She then asks him if it was for Samantha's concert, in which he asked how she knew when he had completely forgotten. She then pointed out that the invitation was left on his desk for quite a while and they even put it in the system. He then asked her to prepare a gift, a red cashmere sweater. The secretary also says that Sam already has a red sweater, and she even wore it the last time she was at their office. Meanwhile, Sam was practicing some notes with her guitar when she saw Ian's presentation folder on the couch. Worried that he would not be able to finish the meeting, Sam quickly took the folder and drove with her friend Lottie to Ian's workplace. While they quickly ran inside, Ian had just begun his very important meeting. When she arrived, she asked the man outside to pass the folder inside to Ian, but he refused as it is against the policy. Determined to help her boyfriend, Sam interrupts the meeting, but when Ian turns around, he also has a folder in his hand. This causes everyone to look at them awkwardly as Sam leaves. As the day progresses, we see Ian in a taxi. He tells the driver about how he and Sam are going through difficulties. The driver recommends that he should just love her, because if he doesn't appreciate it, he might lose that love someday. After Sam's concert that night, Ian tries to dismiss Sam's favorite student. At dinner, their conversations were quite awkward, with Ian still upset that Sam had interrupted a very important meeting. Ian then asks whether their relationship is going to last. Sam then confronts Ian where her frustration boils over. She gets angry at Ian for his attitude towards her and tells him that she just wants him to love her. As she got up to leave, Sam asked why he was at the travel agency, to which he replied he was going on a boat business. Sam storms out of the restaurant in tears. Ian follows close behind and asks her for forgiveness. Sam gets in a passing taxi, and as Ian tries to get in beside her, he notices the driver is the same man who he traveled with earlier that day. The man gives Ian an ominous smile, and as the clock hits 11 p.m., Sam closes the door, leaving Ian standing there. As he watches the taxi drive away, Ian makes one last attempt to reconcile with Sam, and runs after the taxi as it stops at a traffic light. Before he gets there, the light changes, and the taxi begins driving again. As it speeds up, the taxi is struck violently by another car, and comes to a halt in the middle of the street. Ian stood in shock before running to the taxi. At a nearby hospital, Sam is being taken into the ER, and Ian is running through the hospital looking for her. He arrives outside the room Sam is in, and through a window, sees her wounded and is surrounded by medical personnel. Sam looks over to the window towards Ian, a blank expression on her face. Ian begins to cry, and before the doctors can help her, Sam succumbs to her injuries and dies. He falls to the floor in the hospital in disbelief. We see Sam's friend Lottie enter a hospital room where Ian is sitting in a chair. They both begin to cry. Ian goes back to his apartment, finds Sam's notebook and opens it, finding a song she was working on. The notebook wrote that in a relationship, there is always someone who loves more, and Ian continues reading as he cries. He falls asleep clutching the notebook close to him. As the next day begins, Ian wakes up with the notebook still held tight. He is shocked to hear a voice behind him, telling him not to read a word. He jumps up and screams, only to see Sam standing in his apartment. After the initial confusion, Ian comes to the conclusion that the previous day must have been a dream, and continues the morning, happy to have Sam by his side. As the morning progresses, however, Sam gets burnt by her hair straightener in the same place she had been burnt by the kettle in his supposed dream. Trying to shake this off as a sheer coincidence, Ian takes no further notice of it. Other events similar to those he already experienced begin happening too. When they were walking, someone bumps into Sam, causing Coca-Cola to be spilt on her. Ian decides to mention his dream to her, and she convinces him that it was just a dream, and if his watch remains in working order, then it can't possibly be the same day as his dream. Nonetheless, Ian is still cautious, and while in a meeting at work, he holds his folder in his hand. Sam sees this from outside the glass door, and his meeting is left uninterrupted. Later in the day, Ian gets into a taxi. After talking to the taxi driver, he realized that the driver is the man from the previous day. He questions the man about this, and the driver says he does not remember, although he once again gives Ian an ominous smile, implying that he may in fact know about Sam's accident and all the previous events. The driver then told Ian to hurry up, because time was running out. This convinces Ian once and for all, and he runs to Sam, who's helping her friend Lottie set up for an art gallery. After convincing her to come with him, he brings her to a train station. A delighted Sam makes sure that she'll be back in time for her concert, which Ian ensures they will be. After much questioning, he reveals that they are traveling to his rural hometown. Ian brings Sam up a mountain to a spot he used to visit as a child. The two find a little abandoned cottage on the mountainside to use as shelter during a rainstorm. Upon setting up a fire while Sam sits down, Ian notices that his watch is cracked and isn't working anymore. He turns to look at Sam, who's lighting candles on a table. Sam smiles, and Ian asks what she would do if she didn't have a lot of time left. She replies that she'd do what she's doing right now, spending time with him, just being together. Ian and Sam begins kissing before making love. Afterwards, they make their way back down the mountain, disappointed that they never made it to Ian's spot. In the town below, the two have drinks, and Ian tells Sam about his father, who lost his beloved job in 1993 before becoming an alcoholic and dying sometime later. Ian reveals that he wishes he could have helped his father more, but Sam says he was only a child at that time, and wherever his father is now, he's proud of him. And she also told him that death doesn't put an end to love, and Ian cries. The two travel back to London, and Ian takes Sam on the London Eye as another surprise. They then travel back to their apartment while Sam is getting distracted. Ian takes a page from her notebook and brings it to a nearby photocopying shop, while Sam travels to her concert with her violin. Before the show begins, Ian sends a bouquet of flowers up to Sam and gives the photocopy pages to an organizer. His plan is soon revealed, however, when Ian comes onto center stage with a microphone. He calls a reluctant Sam to his side, who gets nervous. Ian goes and talks to Sam at her seat, and tells her she doesn't want to disappoint her future fans. Sam proceeds onto stage as the orchestra begins to play the song, printed on Ian's photocopy sheets. She sings the song she wrote for Ian in her notebook, and the crowd bursts into applause at her performance. While walking to a restaurant of Sam's choice, she describes her feelings to Ian. In an intimate setting, Sam and Ian discuss the day in a sheer contrast to Ian's experience in the previous night. Ian gives Samantha a charm bracelet with different charms and symbols. A musical note, a violin, a flower, which he describes as exquisite, much like Sam herself. The train they took that day, which Sam always wanted to see. The two sat in silence as Sam tears up and smiles across at Ian. As they leave the restaurant in a downpour, Sam tries to get into a taxi to take them home. Ian realizes that they are in the same spot as the previous night when the accident took place, and tells her to look at him and listen. In the rain, Sam listens as Ian professes his love for her, and tells her that if it weren't for her or today, he would never have known true love at all. Sam begins crying and says she doesn't know what to say, to which he replies that she doesn't need to say anything. A taxi pulls up and Sam gets in, beckoning Ian to get in too. He gets in next to her. As the taxi approaches the traffic lights, Ian and Sam kiss. He looks forward and sees the clock strike 11 p.m. and the same ominous smile he has seen so many times already. Sam smiles at him as the taxi pulls away and the images of Sam's accident flash through his mind. He sees a car light through his window and grabs Sam tight for the last time. Sam's scream can be heard. At the hospital, we see Sam's friend Lottie running through the halls. She turns a corner and enters a hospital room where Sam is sitting in a bed. Sam tells Lottie about Ian's premonition and how she didn't believe him. Then Sam told Lottie how Ian confessed that Sam taught him love. She and Lottie begin to cry. In the end, it was Ian who was the victim of the accident. 6 months later, Sam is sitting in the apartment, with Ian's watch in her hands. Everything is packed into boxes and Sam takes a last look around the room. We see her singing on stage in a restaurant with Laurie at the closest table to her. She travels to the cottage on the mountain which she and Ian visited, and continues climbing until she reaches Ian's spot, at the peak of the mountain. She stands at the top, staring out into a valley, not knowing what lies ahead.